There is nothing more iconic and evocative of the Underdark than the giant mushroom. These beautiful and mysterious shrooms make great scatter terrain for your Underdark table. With flat tops that allow minis to climb and fight high above the ground, they will add playability and interest to your game sessions. Let's get started. We'll begin by looking through some of the XPS scraps laying around the workroom. This project will be a great way to use up some of the leftover pieces of foam. I'm looking for scraps that are long enough to make the stipe. Did you know that the stem of a mushroom is called a stipe? I didn't either, but I rolled a nat 20 on nature. I'm happy to share this esoteric knowledge with you. Trim them along the side in a taper. This will result in a section of foam that tapers from thicker at the bottom to more pointed near the top. I'm using my Proxen hot wire cutter to do this work, but you could easily use a sharp knife or a handheld foam cutter. If you aren't ready to invest in a Proxen cutter at this time, remember there are handheld cutters available online for less than $25. They are a great addition to your toolset. Take your time and don't worry if your cuts are wavy or imperfect. We will smooth them in a later process. This is the last stipe I'm going to make. It's going to be the tallest mushroom. Since I've got a bunch of scrap foam with curves, I'm going to use one of the curves to add some interest to this one. When I'm crafting, I like to be thinking ahead. I test the lengths of the stipes against each other. I think this is a pleasing ratio. What do you think? Now that we have the rough shape of our stipes cut, we need to get rid of the sharp edges. The fastest and easiest, if not the cleanest method I've found, is to just carve them with a rough sandpaper. This time I'm using a 60 grit sheet from my rotary sander. You should be able to use any coarse sandpaper you have laying around. Just work gently on the edges. Take your time and go over the sharp edges with a few light passes. Soon the unnatural looking edges will be smooth and begin to look very organic and alive. On the bottom, try to achieve a rounded form. Don't worry about making a flat area for glue. Later we will bury the rounded bottoms in a liberal dab of hot glue. Because the base is round, we will have a lot of control over the angle the stipe comes out of the soil. I'm just going to let you watch the process I use for a while. Once the rough carving is complete, I use a finer grit sandpaper to smooth the rough texture the 60 grit paper leaves in the foam. There isn't really anything complicated or difficult about this process. The goal is to eliminate the sharp edges and to attempt to achieve an organic-looking shape. Whenever you're working on creating things that actually exist in the real world, it's always a good idea to look up as many reference photos as you can find. Make sure not to leave any flat areas in the middle. While we are focusing on the edges, it's important to soften the flat parts we get due to starting with flat sheets of XPS foam. One additional benefit of this is it will render the entire stipe with the same texture. Okay, now that the stipes are all done, we can work on the caps. Those in the know call them the pilias. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Another chance to use up some of the scraps of foam. We could use a circle cutting jig for this, but the imperfections of cutting them freehand will add to the organic look of the finished mushroom. You might want to cut a chunk out of 1 or 2 of your mushrooms, as this will add some visual interest and variety. Our pilias are looking good. They have a nice descending size differential. Since mushroom caps are smooth and rounded, we can make the carving with the sandpaper easier by running a bevel around the tops of our foam discs. Since I'm using the Proxon, I'm going to need to move the wire back on the tension arm. This will cause the wire to cut the foam at about a 45-degree angle. If you're using a handheld hot wire cutter or a knife, this process will be easy enough to replicate. The offcuts from this process create a very interesting shape. I've used them at the base of the stipes on some of the mushroom clusters. As with anything in nature, the more variety we can add to our mushrooms, the better. The process of spinning the discs is a bit tricky. There is something about the angles at play that makes it require a lot of hand-eye coordination. If I make more mushrooms in the future, I'll likely use my handheld cutter for this step. The good news is that this step does not need to be perfect, as its only purpose is to hog out a lot of material fast to make the sanding process go faster and produce less dust. Now it's time to make the gills. Druids and wizard types like to call them lamella. This process uses fire, so if you're just a kid, don't do this without adult supervision. It's better to leave playing with fire to higher level wizards. With a sharp X-Acto blade, cut a series of lines into the bottom of the mushroom cap blanks we just made. I start with one line, then make my second cut 90 degrees offset to my first cut. This gives me a nice cross on the bottom. It's easy to place the remaining lines by splitting the difference between 2 cut lines. I score the gill lines until I'm happy I've made enough. Be careful not to cut the whole way to the edge. You will want to leave about 1/8 of an inch margin all around the cap. Once you have all the lines cut with your blade, it's time to heat things up. For this process, make sure you have good ventilation and be extra careful not to hold the flame in one place for too long. XPS foam is very sensitive to heat, and the briefest touch of flame is usually enough to achieve the desired effect. I make multiple quick passes with the flame. Never hold the flame in one place more than a second, as the foam will begin to melt. Since I want the gills to form a small mound near the middle, I focus my passes around the edges and somewhat avoid applying heat to the middle. If you're going to make a lot of mushrooms at one time, it can be handy to use a small tea light candle as your source of flame. Just be sure to keep the candle on your craft table and hold the foam over the flame. If you try to move the candle, it will almost certainly spill wax. Our next step is to break out the 60 grit sandpaper and round off the top of the caps. We're basically just doing the same process as we did for the stipes. Take your time, put on a good video for some background, and enjoy yourself. I recommend you check out Wylock's Armory. He has so many great videos you can listen to while you work. Just one of his mega compilations will get you through even the biggest crafting project. I'm going to add my favorite YouTubers to my channel notes, so don't forget to check back later. When you're done with the 60 grit paper, don't forget to use some finer grit sandpaper to smooth out the rough texture. I don't try to get them completely smooth. In my world, the giant mushrooms have a slight texture and feel like suede. They probably make a great place to take a nap. Too bad it's so dangerous down here in the Underdark. Thanks for watching. In the next video, we'll add some nice details to the mushrooms, assemble them, base and paint the mushroom. I'm very new to YouTubing, and who knows how many of these videos I'll end up making. If you would like and subscribe, I'm sure that will help inspire me to keep making videos. Until next time, go craft something and build your world. Oh, hey, you're still here? Go now. Shoo, go craft something.